are many religious and spiritual traditions in the world, that we all meditate within a tradition, that all traditions belong to one great tradition of humanity. All our traditions are connected. They have a root tradition. The root tradition is held in a prehistoric silence, a primeval awakening to our human meaning and purpose. With historical and cultural evolution, different religions have emerged, giving unique insights and perceptions into the silent mystery. Common to all these traditions is the practice of silence, which takes us beyond words, from the mind to the heart, through the way of pure attention, the way of our being. Tradition is not static and unchanging, but rather the active transmission of insights. So as John Main said, every time we meditate, we enter into this living tradition. This gives you a little background visually of Father John's life, which we will embark on a little bit of that story. John Main was first introduced to meditation by the Indian Hindu monk Swami Satyananda while he was working in the diplomatic service in Malaya in the 1950s. John Main met Swami Satyananda in a professional setting, as he was the founder and head of the Pure Life Society. But during the meeting, John Main became aware that he was in the presence of a deeply spiritual man, a human being of profound spiritual wisdom. John Main himself was a keenly religious practicing Catholic, and in his dialogue with Swami Satyananda on the spiritual life and prayer, he was introduced to the prayer of the heart, or meditation, and he asked whether the Swami could teach him as a Christian to meditate. The Swami agreed and said that meditation would make John Main a better Christian. So John Main met with him each week for the remaining 2 years of his posting in Malaya, having Swami Satyananda answer his questions and learning to meditate using the faithful recitation of a mantra during 2 periods of meditation, morning and evening, developing the discipline of silence, stillness, and simplicity. After the 2 years, John Main returned to Ireland and became a professor of law at Trinity College in Dublin. After a number of years of teaching, he then became a Benedictine monk in London. However, when he was talking with his novice master about his personal prayer and described the way of meditation, and was looking forward to discussing this with someone whom he thought would understand it, because at that time meditation was not well known in the Western world, as the contemplative tradition was very marginalized, nearly lost. John Main was saddened to have to give up his meditation practice, as his novice master said that it was not a Christian way of prayer. So although it was difficult and a difficult decision, he gave up the practice, but wrote many years later that it was a painful time as he went into a kind of spiritual desert. He continued to pray using other forms of prayer in the monastery, the divine office, reading scripture, celebrating the Eucharist, but the prayer of the heart that he had learned in the East was missing. Some years later, Father John was sent to be the headmaster of a Benedictine school in Washington, D.C. He was in a very busy time of his monastic life when one day a young student who had been traveling in Asia came to visit. The Catholic student said that he'd been to Buddhist zendos, in ashrams, temples, and mosques, and had learned about meditation. But since coming home, he had been to his parish church, but no one knew about meditation. And anyone he met that did or practiced meditation had gone to another tradition to find it and to learn. And the student asked, "Do we not have any teaching in our tradition?" This was in the late 1960s, which was also a time of much questioning. Father John was struck by this question and went back to trace the early church teachings to his own roots in the Christian tradition. He went back to the teachings of the Desert Fathers in northern Egypt and to the writings of the desert monk John Cassian, who had distilled the teachings and brought them to the Western Church. John Main found two great conferences on prayer, dating from the early 5th century. And in the 9th conference, Cassian speaks of the many forms of prayer in the Christian understanding. Every tradition could list different aspects of prayer or different aspects of meditation. And John Cassian gives a beautiful description of the multiplicity of different forms of prayer, but yet their essential unity. However, in Cassian's 10th conference, John Main recognized the Christian tradition of meditation, which became the foundation of his major work. It was with a very wonderful astonishment, these are Father John's words, that I read in his 10th conference, meaning Cassian's, the 10th conference of the practice of using a single short phrase to achieve the stillness necessary for prayer. The mind casts out and renounces the rich and ample matter of all thoughts and restricts itself to the poverty of a single verse. Father John continues, in reading the words of chapter 10 in the same conference on the method of continual prayer, I arrived home once more and returned to the practice of the mantra. I, Michelle, can't help but feel Father John's excitement on discovering or rediscovering meditation practice and the contemplative way in our tradition. Father Lawrence Freeman, who is the director of the World Community for Christian Meditation, uses the symbol, the wheel of prayer, which we will explore more in another session during this course. And he suggests that different forms of prayer, devotional prayer, liturgical or ritual prayer, mental prayer like petition or intercession, these different forms meet at the center of the wheel, where we find dynamic stillness, which is the source of the motion and activity of our lives. In my experience, as valuable as they are, there remains a certain self-consciousness to most forms of prayer. For me, meditation allows the truest path to a type of selflessness in prayer, as it requires leaving self behind, leaving even our own prayer behind, and yielding to the Spirit of God praying in us, deeper than words in our human heart. The mantra leads us deeper than thought, images, or words to pure being. What John Main recovered was the contemplative tradition in Christianity, which allows us entry into the mystical path. The path of the mystics of Christianity, including Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and in modern times, Thomas Merton and John Main. The connection between these mystics and us lies in what's called everyday mysticism, available to each of us on the contemplative path. Meditation is a practice that allows us to dispose ourselves to the grace of contemplation. Contemplation is a grace, not something we do, but something we receive from God by grace. But this requires us to wait. For God alone, my soul in silence waits. That is Psalm 62. It teaches us to be truly human. I believe that I, or something in my spirit, resonated with my early experience of meditation, because 10 years or so before I found the practice, I had my first abject encounter with the utter inability to mentally or emotionally find or form a single word or sound of vocal or discursive prayer. Extraordinarily, this happened in the cathedral of a town, what was then a town in Tuscany, surrounded by the type of Renaissance art and architecture that, like most, I love and had found so inspiring from the beginning when I fell absolutely in love with Florence. I was with my sister and my mother, and we were huddled together, trembling with the shocking realization that my gifted brother, who had been working as an architect in Italy, was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, serious mental illness. I know now that I was traumatized by this realization, but I was not shut down in being able to communicate with doctors, with my sister's Italian family, or even with strangers in the town as we navigated everyday life. But I was completely shut down on the level of prayer. I could not even find the words to beg, to plead, far less to ask. There was nothing, only nothing. This was not a matter of faith. Not then, or in any of the subsequent traumatic experiences of my life, can I ever say I lost my faith. But I have lost what I thought was prayer. I live with questions. I always have, and feel quite certain that I will until my last breath. But I have never doubted transcendence. Doubt and faith are not two opposing poles for me. They are not mutually exclusive. They've always been and continue to be inextricably intertwined in my mind and in my heart. And I'd go so far as to say, maybe in my soul. It was when I began to meditate that I recognized the familiarity of the desert I found myself in that day in the Duomo in Prato, and where I continued to find myself. In meditation, I recognized that place of profound emptiness, but it became and it remains the place where my spirit found and finds its voice, a place without language or sound, a wordless, imageless voice, a harmony without lyrics or sound, not even a place or a space. It just is. For me, there is no lamentation, though chants, poetry, and symbolic language come the closest, that gives me the depth of access or approximates the interiority that stillness, silence, and simplicity do. In no other way that I have found to date can access the wordlessness, especially in suffering, that I've come to know personally and intimately, and why I commit to share the contemplative way. Prayer, according to Father Lawrence, is any art of attention that makes you more present to yourself and the mystery that you are part of. So I'd just like to end this part on Father John Main's teaching on prayer. All Christian prayer is a growing awareness of God in Jesus. And for that growing awareness, we need to come to a state of undistraction, to a state of attention and concentration. That is a state of awareness. The only way that I have been able to find to come to that quiet, to that undistracted, to that concentration, is the way of the mantra. Just like to go back and show you Father John Main, the founder of our practice and of this meditation movement that we are part of, on the left on my screen, and Father Lawrence Freeman, now the director of the World Community for Christian Meditation, on the right. Of course, you know our WCCM leadership, Caribbean leadership, Father Sister Ruth Montrechard, who is the Caribbean coordinator and also the coordinator of the Oblate community and the patron of the World Community for Christian Meditation Caribbean, is our own Archbishop, the Most Reverend Charles Jason Gordon. And of course, we also have with us and leading us through this series and this introduction to meditation course, Sandy Bengoshay, who is our relatively newly appointed Trinidad and Tobago coordinator. So now it's time for the breakout room, Sandy. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So we learned a little bit about who John Main was and a little bit about the history of the mantra of where we found. So I guess we could stop sharing. Yeah, great. And yeah, great. And let me just stop recording so that we could go into our breakout rooms.